Good evening and welcome. It is time once again for CU Immigration here on WRFU LP Urbana, 104.5 FM and UPTV. I will be your host for this evening. My name is Mr. Garza, and I am here to let you know that WRFU is an open forum for the Urbana-Champaign community. Views expressed are those of the speakers and are not intended to represent WRFU or UCIMC, or as we like to say on the televised version of this show, UPTV. These views are our own, and by our, in this instance, I mean myself and anyone whose article I happen to be reading who may have included some views in that article. That being said, I don't necessarily agree with everything I read. I talk about it a bit, but I read it for the purpose of informing you about things and giving you a sense of what people are saying about those things, and not necessarily because I'm like, yeah, me too, yeah, I agree with that, me too. So, I mean, I don't read a whole lot of stuff that's I'm really opposed to, and when I do, I make a big point of explaining why and tell you about it. So you can generally assume that most of what I read, I more or less feel that it's good information and it's a good point of view. But yeah, that being said, there are things in there sometimes that I'm like, oh, I don't know about that part. I'm not so sure about this part. But, you know, it's all good. All good to know and to hear and to read and to understand, because the point obviously is to communicate information, communicate perspectives, and that sort of thing. That's what this show is all about. Okay, so let's begin with something happening in the future. We're going to look into the future here. March 8th, not that far away, but a little bit into the future. The CU's Bend the Arc, the CU local version of Bend the Arc, it's a national organization, is hosting a Democratic Candidate Forum, District 13. So their little message reads, "Don't miss our candidate forum featuring Democratic candidates for Congressional District Illinois 13. So far, we have a commitment from David Palmer, and we expect Nikki Budzinski will also attend. The forum, hosted by Bend the Arc, Jewish Action CU, and co-hosted by Friends and Allies, will be held on Tuesday, March 8th, 7 to 8:30 p.m. on Zoom. Elizabeth Hess, former radio announcer and host of the podcast I Have to Ask, will be the moderator." So you have to go to their website, as I'm understanding this, and click on the RSVP button in order to receive the Zoom link. So there's a long link here, and I'm not sure. I could read this to you, but it's like a lot of medium = email at UTM _. You know, it's a bunch of stuff like that. But just try going to cu.bendthearc.us. I don't know if it's a .com or what. I could try it, I guess. Well, I've got the computer here. What do I get here? cu.bendthearc.us. Okay, let's see if I take all this stuff at the end off. Hey, there's a little live action computer tutorial here. Okay. Yes. So if you go to https:// cu.bendthearc, all one word, BENDTHEARC.us, you'll get to their homepage. And then right on the front page of their homepage is a District 13 Candidate Forum link that you can click on. Bonk, like that. And that'll give you all the information. And then there's a big orange RSVP button down at the bottom, which you can get their link to the Zoom thing. So that's how it works. Did you catch all that? I hope so. It's cu.bendthearc.us, and then you can follow all the various little tabs to click and do all the things you're supposed to do and get all the information. Now, this is March 8th, so this is a month away. But it's an important thing, and I think we should always try to, keep abreast of this sort of thing as much as possible and be involved because, it's easy enough. I mean, one reason that people have political affiliations is obviously to give you a sense of like, okay, this person generally is in this area when it comes to issues that I agree with. They more or less agree with me on this stuff, but not always. I mean, as we can see from the Senate stuff and who from West Virginia, it's Democrat, yeah, agrees with you generally, yeah, agrees with you enough to get stuff done, not really. So it's good to check these things out and get a sense of who's who and what they think, and also just see how they express themselves, because there are a lot of politicians that really make me wonder who supports them and why, because they don't talk well. They don't seem to really have an understanding of the issues. It's like if you can't explain something clearly, you're not able to conceptualize it clearly, in my opinion. I don't know. It could be that there are people that are great thinkers and poor talkers, but speech is just the expression of thought, I think. And so it seems to me, anyway, that if you understand something, and if you have feelings about it, strong feelings or even just, convictions, let's say firm convictions, you should be able to explain something well enough anyway. As a listener, you should be able to listen to them and go, okay, I see what they're getting at here. He's not isn't a very good speaker, but I get it. I get the point. And if you can't do that, or if they're just blah, blah, blahing, going off into generalities about things and using a lot of just sort of stock phrases, that to me is a red flag when it comes to politicians. And I start going, well, wait a minute, why don't you have a more firm opinion about this? Is it because you haven't thought about it, or is it because you are trying not to say the wrong thing? That what somebody wants to hear, so you're trying to kind of say something that's going to, fit their expectations. And that to me is dangerous, because I don't want politicians that are going to tell me one thing and somebody else something else. I want a politician that's going to say the same thing to everybody, and like, sorry if you don't agree with this, but here is my opinion about this. This is my opinion. So yeah, I think these things are important. And I know that we've done a couple of things like this in the past at CU Immigration. I think we probably will again in the future. Right now, as many groups are, we've been in a sort of a holding pattern for a while during the pandemic, because it's hard to recruit new members. Members come and go from groups, and you have to get used to that sort of turnover in people. They'll come in, they'll be really interested for a while, and then they kind of lose interest, or something important happens. They have kids, they change jobs, something like that. That's just like, okay, all of a sudden my focus is over here. I don't really have time for this anymore. And that's fine. That's good for the life of an organization. But at the same time, you need to be out contacting people and connecting, interacting with them, in order to get new members. And during a period when we're all kind of staying home and avoiding being in public places, it's not a good time to come up with new members. So we've definitely, for the last couple of years, been in a holding pattern, I would say. I haven't taken on any really big, meaty issues, and haven't expanded the group or even maintained, we've maintained a core group of people that are committed to this, and that's good. That's a really good thing, and we meet regularly and get things done. But we're definitely semi-hibernating, I guess you could call it. So anyway, that being said, I think we will get back into things like candidates forums and more public activities once all this virus nonsense kind of, I want to say it goes away, but it's not going to go away. It's part of life. Once it simmers down to a tolerable level where we're not going to die potentially by going out and shaking hands with somebody. Anyway, I need to get on with what I'm doing here because I'm just blabbering at you. So I've got a really diverse collection of stuff here today. No particular theme, but I just thought that these are just things that I ran across that I thought were interesting, and I thought I would share them with you. This first one is from physics.org, believe it or not. Physics.org or phys.org, whatever that is. And it's entitled Swedish Tweets About Immigration Reveal New Insights into Polarization Dynamics. So we talk a lot about, on this show, about how people use the topic of immigration as a wedge issue, as a way of like breaking people apart and say, well, look, you don't support this, do you? Well, let's, you come over to our side because we also don't support it, that kind of thing. And not being content to just utilize what is an issue that a lot of people don't understand. They have found, apparently, that they can say almost anything about it, and somebody out there will believe it. And other people, if they don't believe it, will at least sort of go, well, I don't know, that sounds pretty bad. That sounds kind of exaggerated, but it's sort of right. They kind of go along with it, even though they don't necessarily literally believe it word for word. So there's a constant pushing of the envelope of what you can say about immigrants to go as far as they can with it. And there are people that are really, really, really racist and bigoted and nationalistic, and who knows what all nastiness is going on in their minds, who are just definitely pushing things as far as they can. And thankfully, we don't have who in the national spotlight all the time like he was for the last 4 years, adding his poison to the conversation. But he's still around and he's still doing it, and there are other people who've picked up that torch and kind of run with it, that notion of, hey, it doesn't matter what you say. You can lie, you can just blatantly lie to the point where people are, who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes kind of statements. And it doesn't matter because people don't care, or enough people don't care that it's become so, I hate to use this word, but tribalized. It's now our group and that group. And so our group, even when they're doing something wrong, it's still kind of okay. And their group, when they do anything, even if they're not doing something wrong, they're terrible, And that's how politics has become, how a lot of people think about it. Not everybody. But there are enough people that think about it that way that it operates. It continues to operate in this sort of us versus them. Anything we do is excusable. Anything they do is inexcusable kind of way. So that's the polarization I think that they're talking about, is people being pushed into extremes from having just general opinions are not even much of an opinion to hearing the rhetoric on these different sides. I'm trying to avoid saying both sides because there are more than two sides to everything. But, at least on a lot of things, political, it has come down to both sides because there's like this median line which you can't cross anymore, it seems. You can't be like, well, I think fiscally we ought to do this. Taxes should be lowered, but, immigration rates should be high. You can't split that kind of thing anymore publicly and really get away with it. I suppose you can do it privately, but as far as publicly goes, you're kind of stuck. At least many politicians are stuck. Anyway, I'm just blabbing again, but that's the point of this, is somebody did an analysis here of Twitter tweets. And so let's see what they have to say and stop listening to me. Okay. A computational analysis of more than 1 million tweets from Swedish speakers has found little evidence for significant polarization within this network on the topic of immigration, even after Sweden's 2015 refugee crisis. Elizaveta Kopacheva and Victoria Yantseva of Linnaeus University, Sweden, present these findings in the open access journal PLOS ONE on February 9th, 2022. Social media platforms can enable grassroots activism and expose people to new ideas, but they can also create echo chambers and cause group polarization. However, most research into polarization caused by social media has focused on political party support or membership while neglecting a wider selection of social issues, such as immigration. To broaden understanding, Kopacheva and Yantseva studied a network of Swedish speakers who discussed immigration on Twitter from 2012 to 2019. The research team applied analytical tools known as network analysis and natural language processing to almost 1,200,000 tweets in order to explore the dynamics of interactions between active users in the network and to quantify polarization in their sentiments regarding immigration. This analysis revealed the development of different discussion communities within the network over time. However, despite immigration being thought of as a controversial topic, the researchers did not find significant evidence for polarization between users in the network and communities. Moreover, polarization dynamics did not change significantly in the wake of the 2015 refugee crisis, when an unprecedented number of asylum seekers came to Sweden, and the government struggled to adequately accommodate them. However, the researchers did note a shift in sentiment after the 2015 crisis, with users' tweets becoming more negative in tone and a declining proportion of tweets having a neutral tone. The authors discussed potential mechanisms that could underlie their findings and outline possible next steps. For instance, future research could incorporate more information on Twitter users' behavior and consider less active users, or it could examine the potential impact of Twitter's 2017 expansion of the maximum allowed length of each tweet. Overall, the researchers say, their findings could help clarify the potential role social media could play in reducing radicalization and right-wing populism. The authors add, we detected no permanent changes in the levels of polarization that could be directly attributed to the crisis, which applies both to the network and community levels. Still, we saw a moderate but long-lasting shift towards a more negative tonality of users' messages after the crisis, and a declining share of neutral tweets. So that's kind of interesting. Of course, this is Sweden, and it's a very different environment from the U.S., but it is kind of interesting. And I'm glad people study things like this because it's so easy to just pick out some extreme examples of something and say, look, here's what's going on. Here's what people think. But who are these people that think this? Are there a lot of people? Is it just a few really loud, really obnoxious people? What is it that's going on? So I think it's important to have an idea of what a number of people over across a spectrum are thinking about things, rather than just who's the loudest and who does the most. I don't have this article in front of me right now, but I read something yesterday or the other day about how the maximum amount of disinformation comes from a very small group of so-called influencers on social media. Somebody like followed things back to where they came from, like statements that people were making that were untrue, and found that there's a relatively small group of people making these statements, and then it just expands from there. So, and just because that most people aren't the creators of this disinformation, doesn't mean that they aren't the believers and spreaders of it. So that's important to remember. But even so, it shows how influential people can make a huge difference in what they say. And I think it also shows us that not so influential people like myself can also make a difference in the other way. It's you, when you share something, it moves beyond yourself. And so I think it's important for all of us to share our thoughts and opinions on important topics, because we make a difference. There are a lot of people who have vague feelings. I guess you could put it this way. They feel vaguely about issues. They're open to being swayed. They hear about something and they have like, oh, I wonder about this. This seems important. I should have an opinion, but they can't articulate that opinion. If you just caught them at that moment and said, well, what do you think about it? They'd be like, well, I don't know. I'm not really sure. And I've had a lot of conversations with this about people where a topic will come up and they'll be like, oh, that just sounds, we ought to do something about that. They have this feeling about the topic, but they don't have a firm idea of what they're supposed to think or how to express that feeling. So that's where influencers come in. That's where those of us who are sharing our opinions come in, because if we do have firm feelings about these things and can articulate them, then we can say, well, look, here's what I think. Blah, 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 this, logical that, this means this, and end of topic. And then they're like, yeah, that makes sense. So you have taken them from this, I ought to feel something about this, to, oh, I agree with this guy. And they will go with that agreement until or unless someone who has a stronger opinion or whose opinion they respect more, that whose opinion is more in line with their sort of natural inclination comes along, and then maybe they'll change it. But you can affect people by sharing your opinion. And I guess it's important to remember that, because there are a lot of people that care, but just haven't really thought through much of anything and don't really have strong ideas about it. So hopefully, it is possible to affect those opinions. I don't know. I mean, I know that people do it. I don't seem to very much, but that's probably because I share the kinds of things I share are not controversial. I don't get on here and get angry, and I'm not trying to make you get angry about things, and so it just doesn't have that much of an effect. I don't know, or maybe I'm just boring. Could be. The next article is from the Nevada Independent, and it's entitled Immigrant Hating Season is here. And this relates to the last one and to what I was talking about earlier and talking about just now. And so you'll recognize this topic right away. So this is an opinion piece. The campaign season is upon us. You know how I know? Because everyone's doing their absolute most to demonize immigrants. Scapegoating the most vulnerable among us for one's own political gain is always vile, of course, but it's especially rich coming from politicians running in a state so heavily dependent on immigrant labor, and particularly nauseating when the candidates spewing the worst of the anti-immigrant rhetoric have built their careers on the very communities they want you to hate. Take, for example, Mr. Joey Gilbert, an attorney from Reno who is seeking the Republican nomination for governor of our great state. Among other things, Mr. Gilbert's law firm has an immigration practice, and his firm's website concedes right off the bat that, quote, the United States is a country of immigrants and a nation that values families and workers who contribute to society, end quote. This sentiment is predictably just a little too close to a bleeding heart for many in the Red Party, so facing criticism. Bad reading of the sentence. Let me try that again. This sentiment is predictably just a little too close to a bleeding heart for many in the Red Party. So facing criticism, Mr. Gilbert was forced to publicly clarify that he, of course, didn't mean all immigrants silly. No. His firm only helps those who did the right thing. In other words, those who have a family member or employer willing to sponsor and petition for them. In true American capitalist form, Mr. Gilbert reminds us that it's all about who you know. Never mind that this path isn't available to the vast majority of immigrants, or that there's a backlog of over 9 million family and employment-based applications currently sitting in limbo with no concrete plan or schedule for when they might be resolved. So even for those lucky enough to have an in, there are no guarantees that they'll ever enjoy the privilege. That's not even the offensive part of his statement, though. Everyone deserves legal assistance in navigating this insane immigration system of ours, and helping eligible folks file for permanent residency or citizenship is a noble endeavor in and of itself. Nothing wrong with that. But to pit those who are lucky enough to have this elusive path to citizenship against those most in need of protection and support is cruel and purposely hateful. In the same video, where he addresses his support of good immigrants, Mr. Gilbert also stresses his support of a border wall and the continued implementation of the Migrant Protection Protocols, or MPP, as necessary for everyone's safety. Everyone here implying that those on the other side of that wall aren't actually human beings equally worthy of protection. Just vermin that we got to keep out of our house at all costs. The horrors of MPP are too vast to get into here, but to call it a humanitarian crisis would be the understatement of the century. To be clear, those crossing the border without inspection, or those presenting themselves at a point of entry seeking asylum, are typically among the most vulnerable and desperate for safety. These are people fleeing unspeakable violence and poverty. They are not here to take anything away from you. They just want to survive. Yet the thousands of migrants we've condemned to these camps on the other side of our southern border, it is a little piece of hell that the United States has deliberately chosen to create and perpetuate